A month before Rupert and I were set to get engaged, Phoenix returned to the country. Rupert forgot that we had planned to go try on wedding dresses and pick out rings that day. Instead, he went to the airport to pick up Phoenix and even threw her a welcome dinner. I waited at home from morning until afternoon. The only thing I received was a photo posted in a group chat by one of Rupert's friends. In the photo, Phoenix was surrounded by everyone, holding a bouquet of roses, with a radiant smile. My fiancé had his arm around her shoulders, leaning his head affectionately toward her. In that picture, Phoenix and Rupert looked every bit like a couple. Meanwhile, I, the actual fiancé, felt like an outsider intruding on someone else's happiness. Who told you to post that in the group? Ivy's in there too. Oh no, I'll delete it right away. Rupert's friend quickly realized the mistake and withdrew the photo. But I had already figured out where Rupert was based on the background decor in the photo. I went out and hailed a taxi, giving the driver the location. As the car drove, a thought suddenly crossed my mind. I felt like a scorned wife going to catch her cheating husband and his mistress. Before I could fully process the thought, I was standing outside the private room. Through the glass on the door, I could see the lively scene inside. Phoenix had lost a game and was being teased to drink a wedding cup toast with one of the men present. As I expected, she was pushed toward Rupert. Both of them were blushing but smiling. Just as Rupert was about to down the drink, I pushed the door open. Rupert. The music in the room abruptly stopped. Rupert's smile froze when he saw me. Ivy, what are you doing here? One of Rupert's friends asked awkwardly. Rupert quickly snapped out of it. Why are you here? I wasn't planning to make a scene, so I calmly explained, we were supposed to go try on wedding dresses today. I waited for you at home, but you never showed up. Rupert seemed to remember only then. He hurried over to me. I'm so sorry, Ivy. I completely forgot. Let's go now. He took my hand and started to leave. Suddenly, Phoenix called out in a pitiful voice, Rupert. Rupert stopped. Phoenix said, I just got back, and you? She didn't finish her sentence, but her look said enough. Rupert hesitated. Ivy, Phoenix just got back today, and I promised to host this dinner for her. Can we try on the dresses another day? You know Phoenix is an important friend. An important friend. What kind of man keeps a photo of his friend in a private album on his phone? Or checks her Instagram every day? I didn't want to expose Rupert's hidden feelings for Phoenix. In a couple of days, we'd be engaged, and once that happened, the position of wife would be mine. I forced an understanding smile. All right. Rupert was visibly relieved. He held my hand and asked, Ivy, why don't you stay? No, the ring you ordered for me has arrived. I'll go pick it up. Okay then. I turned and left the room. When I glanced back, Rupert had already rejoined the group. He and Phoenix were finishing the toast I had interrupted. I heard Phoenix say, Rupert, I can't believe you're actually marrying Ivy. It's not marriage yet, just an engagement. If it weren't for her family's persistence, Rupert might not even be doing this, one of Rupert's friends joked. Is that so? Phoenix looked at Rupert. Rupert just smiled and didn't respond. Another friend chimed in, good thing Ivy didn't stay. Otherwise, how could we have any fun? Phoenix said, don't talk about Ivy like that. I think she's nice, quiet and obedient. Quiet is one way to put it. Boring is another. Rupert, are you sure you won't regret marrying her? What does it matter if I regret it or not? That was Rupert's reply. I knew that if I were there, Rupert wouldn't have answered like that. But he was with Phoenix and his friends, people who had grown up with him and knew his true feelings. He might like me, but with Phoenix around, his affection for me would always come second. I had known this from the beginning. Still, hearing Rupert's response stung. Rupert and I had known each other since our second year of high school. I had just transferred schools and was quite reserved, so I didn't have many friends. Rupert was the class monitor and always looked out for me. Because he showed me kindness, I naturally grew closer to him. But I knew Rupert liked Phoenix. Phoenix was our classmate. She was vibrant and warm, yet also gentle and graceful, like a mix of red and white roses. She could easily get along with the boys in class, but she also knew how to keep them at a distance, maintaining an air of mystery. This combination made her incredibly popular, and Rupert was no exception. In our third year, Rupert and Phoenix started dating, but it wasn't smooth sailing. The biggest issue was their future plans. Phoenix wanted to study art abroad, while Rupert's family expected him to attend a business school, domestically, and eventually take over the family business. They argued about this multiple times, and in the end, Phoenix went abroad. Before she left, Phoenix hugged Rupert and shed tears of both strength and sorrow. "Rupert, forgive me for being selfish. I can't stop my journey for you, but my heart will always be yours." Rupert was deeply moved. "Mine too." After that, Phoenix and Rupert seemed to retreat into the boundaries of friendship. They stayed in touch, with Phoenix sharing her experiences abroad and Rupert liking her photos. Throughout all this, I remained an observer. It wasn't until our second year of university, when Phoenix posted a photo with her new boyfriend on Instagram, that things changed. Rupert and I had chosen the same major, and our families had business ties. At a family gathering, Rupert's mother joked, "Look at these two. They've known each other for so long. They make such a good match." Rupert and I exchanged a glance. I looked away first, smiling faintly, while Rupert seemed deep in thought. After the dinner, Rupert suddenly said, "Ivy, why don't we give it a try?" When he said that, I didn't see any love for me in his eyes. He looked at me calmly, but it felt like he was seeing someone else. "All right." I agreed, not because I was in love with him, but because I knew our family's interests aligned. As the only daughter, I had to consider my family's future, and marrying someone who could benefit our business was a likely path. Rupert's family fit that criteria, and at the time, I had a good impression of him. Rupert and I dated for 4 years. It wasn't like I had no feelings for him. Now that we were finally getting engaged, I was satisfied. But I hadn't expected Phoenix to return at this time. Her presence made me uneasy, like a sudden disruption to a well-laid plan. As I walked down the hallway, lost in thought, I bumped into someone. "Sorry," I murmured. When I looked up, I froze. The man in front of me was lighting a cigarette. The flick of his lighter cast a brief glow on his sharp, cold features behind his glasses. But the flame went out when I collided with him. His eyes, now darker without the light, seemed even more intense. "Mr. Michael." I stammered, surprised to see him here. "What did you call me?" He removed the cigarette from his lips, frowning slightly. He was tall and lean, dressed in a white shirt and black pants, with gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. Despite his refined appearance, the rolled-up sleeves revealed strong, muscular forearms. This was a man who exuded power. I swallowed hard, the words tumbling out of my mouth. "Big brother." This man was none other than Rupert's cousin, Michael. He was only a few years older than us, but he had already taken control of the family business and achieved remarkable success. I first met him when Rupert and I visited his family. Among the elders, Michael held a position of authority. "Ivy, this is my cousin, Michael," Rupert had introduced. I smiled and nodded politely, but Michael's expression turned cold the moment he saw me. He seemed to have some unspoken anger or resentment toward me. "Ivy," he said my name, sending a chill down my spine. "Yes," I replied, confused but polite. "Nice name," Michael said with a cold laugh. He accepted the tea I offered but didn't drink it, instead giving Rupert a meaningful look. Later, I asked Rupert if his cousin disliked me. Rupert shrugged it off. "No, that's just how he is. He may seem gentle, but we're all a bit afraid of him." And I was afraid too. After that encounter, I never saw Michael again, until now. Michael asked, "What are you doing here?" I couldn't tell him I was here to confront Rupert, who had left me alone to celebrate his ex's return. "I'm meeting a friend," I lied. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Leaving already?" "Yes." "I'll take you," he said, pocketing his lighter. "Let's go." His tone left no room for argument. I followed him to his car, only realizing what was happening once I was inside. How had I just agreed to go with him? Michael drove in silence, his focus on the road. After a while, he asked casually, "Where are you headed?" I remembered what I had told Rupert earlier. To pick up the ring. His grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "I thought today was your dress fitting with Rupert." "It was." "And where is Rupert?" "Not with you?" "He's busy," I lied again. Michael glanced at me, his sharp eyes making me nervous. I avoided his gaze, and thankfully, he didn't press further. He dropped me off at the mall. "Thank you," I said, but then I noticed he was getting out of the car too. "I have some time. I'll come with you." "That's not necessary. Let's go." I followed him into the jewelry store, where I presented the receipt for the ring Rupert had ordered. The clerk quickly brought out the ring. "Miss, please extend your hand." As I reached out, Michael suddenly said, "I'll do it." He took the ring and slid it onto my finger. "It suits you perfectly," the clerk exclaimed. I was stunned, unsure of what to make of Michael's gesture. Something felt off. Michael held my hand, examining it. "Do you have other options?" he asked. Both the clerk and I were taken aback. "Yes, of course," the clerk said, quickly bringing out a tray of high-end rings. Michael studied them and picked out a large pink diamond. As he was about to replace the ring on my finger, I quickly pulled my hand back. Michael paused, holding the ring midair. I forced a smile. "This one is fine, thank you." Perhaps it was because I called him Big Brother, but the clerk's eyes widened as she glanced between us. I asked her to pack the ring and left the store as quickly as possible, not daring to look back at Michael. As I walked away, I realized Michael was still following me. "You can go back now," I said softly. Michael adjusted his glasses. "I'm sorry if I overstepped earlier. I just thought, as a new member of the family, you deserve the best." I relaxed a little. "Thank you, but what Rupert gave me is enough." Michael didn't respond. When I looked up, I realized we were outside the bridal shop. The staff recognized me and eagerly ushered me inside. "Miss Ivy, the dresses you picked out have arrived. Since you're here, why not try them on?" I glanced at Michael, who followed us in without hesitation. Why was he coming in? He wasn't the groom. The staff, perhaps misreading the situation, assumed Michael was my fiancé. "Since you're here, why not try them on?" Michael said, meeting my questioning look. "I've attended a few bridal shows abroad. Trust me, my taste is better than Rupert's." I didn't know how to respond. The staff led me into the dressing room, and when I saw the array of wedding dresses, I couldn't help but feel excited. I was about to try on the dress I would wear to marry the man I loved. When I put on the dress and looked in the mirror, I felt a surge of emotion. But then I noticed Michael's reflection behind me. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. The light reflected off his glasses, obscuring his eyes, but I could see a faint smile on his lips. I quickly looked away. "I'm done. I'll change now." Back in the dressing room, I struggled with the zipper, which had gotten stuck and caught my hair. The staff had left to give us privacy, but their absence was now inconvenient. After a few minutes of silence, I peeked out. Michael. He was still there. "What's wrong?" I blushed. "The zipper, it's stuck." Michael stepped closer, his shadow enveloping me. "Let me help." "Where is it?" "On the back." He pulled the curtain aside, and I turned around, feeling his fingers brush against my skin as he worked on the zipper. The dressing room had a mirror, and I tried to avoid looking, but my eyes kept drifting to it. In the reflection, I saw Michael focused on the task, his long lashes casting shadows under the light. He looked gentle, a stark contrast to the cold man I had bumped into earlier. "Done," he said. When he looked up, our eyes met in the mirror. The air between us grew heavy with unspoken tension. I quickly looked away. "Thank you. Let's go." As I tried to leave, Michael grabbed my arm. "You're here alone trying on dresses and picking out rings. Where's Rupert?" "I told you, he's busy." Michael frowned. "What could be more important than you?" His words hit me like a punch to the chest. Michael continued, "Rupert's my cousin. I've known him since he was a child. I know how he thinks. There's another woman who means more to him than you. If he's leaving you alone today, he might just abandon you at the altar tomorrow." "That won't happen," I interrupted, meeting his gaze. "Rupert wouldn't do that to me. He knows what's at stake." Michael's expression darkened. I pulled my arm free. "Thank you for today. You can leave now. I need to change." Michael left, and I could tell he was upset, probably because Rupert was being irresponsible, letting his fiancée handle the wedding preparations alone. But maybe this was for the best. Perhaps Michael would talk some sense into Rupert and ensure our engagement went smoothly. Michael went above and beyond, driving me all the way home. I wanted to show some hospitality and invited him in for tea, but he declined coldly, no need. When I got home, I found that Rupert still hadn't returned. I sent him a message, letting him know I had tried on the wedding dress and picked up the ring. I waited a few minutes, but there was no reply. That night, I woke up from a restless sleep. The house was quiet, and so was my phone. When I checked it, Rupert still hadn't responded to my text. Instead, he had posted on Instagram, "Welcome back." The photo attached was the one that had been deleted from the group chat earlier. In an instant, all my sleepiness vanished. For some reason, Michael's words from earlier in the dressing room echoed in my mind, "There's another woman who means more to him than you. If he's leaving you alone today, he might just abandon you at the altar tomorrow." At the time, I had refuted him with such confidence. But now, seeing Rupert's Instagram post, I suddenly felt all that confidence drain away. My worries weren't unfounded. As the engagement date approached, there were countless details to finalize. But Rupert started coming home late and leaving early. Out of 5 calls I made to him, 3 times he was with Phoenix. His explanation was always the same, "Things have changed a lot here. Phoenix just got back, so I've been showing her around. It's not just me and her, other friends are there too." This showing her around went on for a week. One day, while I was going over the guest list for the engagement party with Rupert's mother, Michael showed up again. One of the elders asked, "Where's Rupert?" Rupert's mother replied, "Rupert's busy today. He can't make it." The elder frowned and scolded, "Why is the groom always absent during wedding preparations?" Rupert's mother looked embarrassed and signaled for me to call Rupert. His phone was off. Just as I was feeling stuck, Michael stepped in front of me. "Rupert flew to City C yesterday. Didn't he tell you?" I stared at Michael in shock. He helpfully pulled out his phone and showed me an Instagram post from Rupert the night before, "Right now, I'm above everything but beneath you." The photo was of Phoenix standing under a sign with that slogan. But I hadn't seen it, Rupert had blocked me from viewing it. My face turned pale. Michael glanced at me, probably thinking I looked pitiful. He spoke up to save me from further embarrassment, "Since Rupert's not here, let's finalize the guest list another day." "Fine. You young people really have no sense of planning," the elder grumbled. When Rupert finally returned, his mother scolded him, and he apologized to her. "What good is apologizing to me? Go apologize to your fiancé." So, Rupert came to me, "Ivy, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me. Let me take you out for a nice dinner tonight." He shook my arm and rested his head on my shoulder. He had always been spoiled by his family, never quite growing up. "All right," I said with a soft smile. The moment I agreed, I felt someone's gaze on me. I looked around but couldn't tell who it was. I only saw Michael lighting a cigarette, the small wheel of his lighter clicking several times without catching fire. The day Rupert took me out for dinner, the weather was terrible. It was pouring rain, but he didn't want to ruin the mood and kept trying to cheer me up. Just as we were nearing our destination, Rupert's phone rang. "Rupert. I'm stuck in the tunnel. It's raining so hard, and my car broke down." Rupert's expression changed instantly. He urgently tried to turn the car around, then remembered I was still with him. "Ivy, I can't take you to dinner. Phoenix is in danger." The moment I heard Phoenix's voice, my heart sank. After hearing her plea, even my usually calm demeanor cracked. "If she's in danger, she should call the police, not you." My raised voice startled Rupert. "What's wrong, Ivy?" "Rupert, I'm your girlfriend and fiancé. Why do you keep ditching me every time Phoenix comes back?" Rupert was at a loss for words. Phoenix called again, her voice even more panicked this time. "Rupert, the car's flooding. What do I do?" Rupert didn't bother explaining further. He dropped me off at the hotel entrance. "Ivy, I'll go get Phoenix. You go inside and wait for me, okay? I've already reserved a table." Before I could respond, he stepped on the gas, and his black car disappeared into the rain. I felt utterly drained and no longer in the mood for dinner. I decided to leave, but my phone and bag were still in Rupert's car. I didn't even have an umbrella. I stood at the hotel entrance, staring out at the pouring rain. Ivy. Michael's voice suddenly came from behind me. He walked over, his brows furrowed. Why are you alone here? Come inside. It's cold out. Michael took off his coat and draped it over my shoulders. The warmth enveloped me, and I felt tears welling up. I was both hurt and embarrassed. Why did Michael always seem to show up when Rupert left me behind? Michael noticed my red, teary eyes. He opened his mouth as if to say something but ultimately stayed silent. Have you eaten? I shook my head. Let's get something to eat. I'll take you home afterward. Michael didn't take me home. Instead, he took me to the hospital. During dinner, I had sneezed a couple of times and started feeling feverish. Michael helped me register, get medicine, and settle into a hospital room. As we passed a room in the hallway, I heard a familiar voice. Rupert, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. Don't say that. Here, eat something. Phoenix lay pale in the hospital bed, while Rupert sat beside her, gently feeding her. The scene was so tender that even the woman in the next bed couldn't help but comment, "You two have such a beautiful relationship." Phoenix smiled shyly, and Rupert remained silent but didn't correct her. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to storm in. But I held back. I couldn't let a moment of anger ruin my engagement to Rupert. I pretended not to see anything, but someone behind me didn't let it slide. Rupert? What's he doing here? Michael's voice was sharp. I saw him about to march into the room and quickly grabbed his arm. Let it go. Michael turned to look at me, his eyes deep and unreadable. There was confusion, but also something else. Back in my private room, Michael spoke up. I think you need to reconsider your relationship with Rupert. I looked at the man standing before me, my gaze steady. The engagement is next week. I don't want any complications. Are you really willing to marry a man who doesn't love you? Rupert never said he doesn't love me, I insisted, feeling like I was back in the dressing room at the bridal shop. Michael stared at me intently. Under his gaze, I gradually faltered. Mr. Michael, do you look down on me? Do you think I'm fooling myself? Michael remained silent. I let out a bitter laugh, my shoulders slumping. I need this marriage, Mr. Michael. Why? In a month, my father's illegitimate child will be born. What kind of family did I come from? Let's put it this way, my parents were both romantics, but they didn't love each other. They loved anyone but each other. I was the product of their arranged marriage, the heir they had to produce before pursuing their own passions. After I was born, their duty was done, and they went their separate ways. I was raised by a nanny. My biological parents? I barely saw them twice a year. As a child, I deluded myself into thinking I was born out of love and hope. But as I grew up, I realized and accepted that my parents didn't love me. It led to a period of deep depression. Last year, I found out my father had started a new family. His new wife was pregnant. My father, who rarely came home, suddenly showed up, not to see me, but to change his will. He wanted to split the inheritance he had once promised solely to me, giving half to his new child. My father's decision is final. But if I marry Rupert, our family's business ties might ensure I get a larger share of the assets. If I can't have love, I should at least have money, right? I said with a bitter laugh. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. My confession had come straight from the heart, and I hadn't even realized I was crying until the tears fell. Michael's expression softened. I'm sorry, he said gently. His look of pity and guilt made my heart ache. He was Rupert's cousin, and I was potentially his future sister-in-law. How had I just poured out my deepest insecurities to him? This wasn't like me, and it shouldn't have been. Thank you for today. It's getting late, so you should head back, I said, regaining my composure and distancing myself. Michael didn't leave right away. He stayed until I finished my 4 and then drove me home. During the ride, aside from a brief acknowledgement of my thanks, he didn't say much. The next day, Rupert rushed home and asked if I was sick. Ivy, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. Rupert looked genuinely remorseful. To make it up to me, he stayed home for the next few days, showering me with care and attention. I suspected Michael had given him a talking to, and I felt even more grateful to Michael. Finally, the day of our engagement arrived. I was dressed in my engagement outfit, and the makeup artist kept complimenting how perfect Rupert and I looked together. Rupert stood behind me, and every time I looked up, I could see him in the mirror. As the ceremony time approached, Rupert's phone started ringing incessantly. I watched him hang up repeatedly, his expression shifting from calm to anxious. I knew who it was. As long as Rupert didn't leave the engagement party, I could pretend nothing was wrong. But then, the unexpected happened. Phoenix showed up. She stood behind Rupert, her beautiful eyes filled with tears. Rupert took her hand and led her to me. "Ivy, I can't go through with the engagement today." Rupert looked at me with that same guilty expression. The elders and guests in the room were stunned. "Rupert, don't do this. Let's talk after the engagement, okay?" I pleaded, my voice trembling. The elders and guests were already here. Even if he had doubts, today wasn't the day to back out. I hated this, but more than that, I was terrified. My father's scrutinizing gaze made me feel like I was on fire. If the engagement fell through, I had no doubt he would rewrite his will immediately. I reached for Rupert's hand, trying to hold on. Rupert's face showed conflict, but then Phoenix's tender voice called out, "Rupert," and it seemed to snap him out of it. "I'm sorry, but the person I love most is still Phoenix." As soon as he said it, his mother slapped him. She scolded him for treating the engagement like a joke. With both families and guests present, his backing out now would only bring shame. "Mom, let's just treat today as a regular party. We can compensate Ivy's family with more business deals," Rupert said. He sounded remorseful, but his words cut deep. My parents, though usually distant, now wore cold expressions, watching to see how this would play out. Rupert's mother, who had always liked me as her future daughter-in-law, was furious that Rupert was the one causing trouble. She scolded him relentlessly, even bringing Phoenix into it. This seemed to push Rupert over the edge. "Fine, I'm not going through with this engagement. I don't want to marry Ivy." His words were impulsive, and he immediately regretted them. "Ivy, that's not what I meant." But in the midst of the chaos, I finally understood one thing: some things just can't be forced. I had been carefully maintaining a facade of peace, but it was like a calm pond, any disturbance would ripple through it. I slumped into a chair, feeling defeated. But then, a familiar, steady voice cut through the noise. "If my brother doesn't want to marry her, then I will." Silence. Dead silence. Shock. Disbelief. Michael stepped forward, took my hand, and said firmly, "Ivy, marry me." His words exploded like a bomb, setting the room into a frenzy. "Michael, what are you saying? Ivy is your brother's fiancée. Rupert just called off the engagement, didn't he?" Michael said with a light laugh. Rupert tried to protest. "I didn't." "You didn't what? You want Ivy to wait while you decide between her and Phoenix? Rupert, why do you think you're the only one with a choice?" Rupert's face turned pale. Today, besides the families and guests, there are also reporters. If you publicly call off the engagement now, how will they save face? Or do you want to choose Ivy after all? Michael's words were sharp and to the point. Between Phoenix and me, Rupert had always been indecisive. He had just chosen Phoenix, and now he wanted to choose me? The backlash would be unbearable. Michael suggested that to minimize the fallout, we should change the engagement from Rupert and me to him and me. But the names on the list are. Names can be changed. We'll come up with a reason. Who would dare question it? It's better than making a scene now. Michael's tone was calm, but carried an undeniable authority. He had the respect and power in the family, and they needed him to steer the ship. After a moment of consideration, the elders on his side agreed. My parents, after weighing the pros and cons, also gave their silent approval. Michael didn't pay them much attention. Instead, he turned his gaze back to me. "Ivy, what about you? Will you marry me?" Michael's eyes were intense, but unlike his commanding voice earlier, there was a hint of nervousness in his gaze. When I didn't respond immediately, that nervousness seemed to grow. In that moment, my mind was a complete mess. But when I met Michael's steady, reassuring eyes, I instinctively said, "Yes." Michael let out a breath of relief. His eyes softened, and a warm light seemed to shine in them. Michael moved quickly. Within half an hour, everything at the engagement venue with mine and Rupert's names on it was replaced. The waiting guests were confused but didn't dare question it. When Michael and I walked in arm, the room buzzed with whispers. But everyone was smart enough to realize something had happened, so despite the gossip, they offered their congratulations. Rupert looked pale and defeated, especially when Michael hinted that everyone should address me as Mrs. Michael. He stared blankly at our interactions, still in shock. Honestly, I was just as stunned. I followed Michael's lead throughout the event. He held me close, his arm around my waist, but it never felt inappropriate. He introduced me to his family and the guests, and after the engagement party, he immediately whisked me away on a honeymoon to escape the chaos. His excuse was, "There's new business overseas. I'll take you with me, and we can relax while we're there." Before I knew it, I was sitting on a bench in front of a famous church, feeding pigeons in the snow. Michael, having just finished a meeting, came to take me to lunch. He held a black umbrella over me, shielding me from the snow. "What do you feel like eating?" "Anything's fine." My response was polite but distant. But when a car splashed water near us, Michael pulled me closer to his side. In that moment, my breath caught. It wasn't that I disliked it, but I still hadn't fully processed that I was now Michael's fiancée. In my mind, he was still Rupert's cousin. "Be careful." Thank you." "You're welcome." Michael responded politely. Maybe. I wasn't the only one struggling to adjust to this new dynamic. I quietly sighed in relief, thinking Michael hadn't noticed my awkwardness. We continued walking, but Michael didn't let go of my shoulder. I wanted to remind him, but didn't know how to bring it up. I glanced up at him. He was focused on holding the umbrella, his lashes dusted with snowflakes. In the cold weather, his gaze and his embrace felt warm and comforting. Michael always sets aside a day each week to explore the city with me. He tells me about the history of the city, and shares stories about his own experiences and life in this country. "The noodles at this restaurant aren't great," I once complained, but it didn't help. "Then why did you order them for me?" "I wanted you to try them too, to see just how bad they are." Michael tells me these awkward moments of his with such seriousness. He has a refined, elegant appearance, and his demeanor is quiet and distant. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who holds petty grudges. That's why there's a strange contrast when he describes these events. I couldn't help but laugh. It is a bit awful. It felt like we both acknowledged the same thing. Michael's eyes also held a hint of a smile. That night, as we were about to go to sleep, Michael suddenly said, "Ivy, you should smile like you did today." I froze. When I first arrived here, I was still caught up in the turmoil and sadness of the recent changes. Even when facing Michael, I couldn't hide it well. My smiles always felt a little forced. But Michael's words suddenly made me realize. It seemed that for several days, I hadn't thought about the annulment. And now that I did, it didn't affect my mood anymore. It was because of Michael. I felt a slight sense of gratitude in my heart. "Thank you." Michael's gaze softened slightly as he reached out to brush a stray lock of hair behind my ear, his eyes trailing from my eyes to my lips. "Can I kiss you?" The atmosphere immediately turned more intimate. Before I could even react, his kiss landed, soft and light, but lingering a bit longer than expected. "Good night," he said softly. That night, I had a dream I couldn't describe. When I woke up, I was flustered around Michael, completely forgetting about Rupert. I stayed with Michael for 2 months. As Christmas approached, we returned home for the holidays. His family had arranged a family dinner. We went there as soon as we landed. When we opened the door, I saw many familiar faces. But things were different now. After all, I had come with Rupert before. Who would have thought that just a few months later, I would be here with Michael instead of Rupert? "Don't be nervous. Sit next to me later." Michael gently reassured me. I felt a little more at ease. Michael held a lot of influence in his family, so I sat beside him at the seat of honor. Across from me, diagonally, was Rupert. He was alone. Compared to our last meeting 2 months ago, he looked more haggard and worn out. When he noticed me looking at him, Rupert's eyes brightened, but then he hesitated. It seemed like he wanted to greet me. But before he could speak, Michael suddenly called my name. "Ivy." I turned to look at him. Michael smiled faintly. "Have some soup first." "Okay." I nodded in response. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Rupert's expression grow dim and bitter. After the family dinner, it was already late. An elder asked if we wanted to go home to sleep or stay there. I subconsciously glanced at Michael. He had just had a drink. We'll go home to sleep, Michael said. He stood up, draping his coat over my shoulders, taking my hand and saying goodbye to everyone one by one. Once we were outside, I couldn't help but ask Michael. I thought you'd suggest staying here. You wouldn't want that. I didn't expect him to have noticed. The driver pulled up in front of us. Michael and I got into the back seat. There was traffic, and with Michael having drunk, the stop-and-go motion made him frown in discomfort. Michael, are you okay? Yeah. His response was brief, and I could tell he was holding back. The driver rolled down the window to let some air in. Michael rested his head on my shoulder. I reached up to massage his temples. Michael seemed to freeze for a moment. Are you not feeling well? No. That was a relief. I exhaled in relief. As I continued massaging, I suddenly realized that I had been worried and caring for Michael just now. When we got home, Michael seemed to have recovered. I finished washing up and came out, only to find Michael standing by the window, gazing into the distance. What are you looking at? I couldn't help but ask. Michael snapped back to reality and looked at me. Nothing. The light by the window was dim. Michael's eyes, behind his glasses, were deep with an unreadable emotion. I was puzzled and glanced out the window. There was a black car parked downstairs, inconspicuous. But I furrowed my brow. Just then, Michael suddenly called me. Ivy. I instinctively responded. Michael suddenly lifted my chin. He took off his glasses, and his kiss came swiftly, hot and overwhelming. I was forced back against the windowsill. With nothing to lean against, I could only hold on to his waist. When the kiss ended, Michael pulled back, but his breath still lingered on me. I could clearly see the desire in his eyes, as dark and deep as a pool. Can we? My heart dropped and then raced faster. I swallowed hard and nodded. Michael kissed me again. He held me tight around the waist, and his other hand reached out. The curtains were drawn. Afterward, there were more family gatherings and meetings. Michael was too busy to accompany me, so he handed me a black card. Sorry, I can't go shopping with you. If you want something, just use this card. God knows how much his guilty look made my heart race. I blushed and waved it off. It wasn't a big deal that he couldn't go shopping with me. He didn't need to feel so guilty. It's fine. I can go alone. In the end, Michael still pressed the card into my hand. Buy more, you won't be able to spend it all anyway. I wandered around the mall, but I really didn't know what to buy. Finally, I ended up in a jewelry store and bought a pair of cufflinks. When I got home, I surprisingly ran into Rupert downstairs. Ivy, he said, looking tired and disheveled. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. I've been waiting for you for a long time. I want to talk to you. There's no need. I don't think we have anything to talk about. I responded coldly to Rupert and started heading toward the door. Rupert stopped me. Just 10 minutes. Can you spare that? I haven't properly apologized. It wasn't necessary, really. But Rupert looked at me with pleading eyes. We had been in a relationship for 4 years. Though our engagement had broken off, we never had a proper and dignified farewell. I sighed. A few minutes later, I sat with Rupert in a cafe by my house. Rupert looked uneasy, hesitant to speak. After a long pause, he finally asked. How are you and Michael doing? We're good. I nodded. That was the truth, but for some reason, Rupert's expression darkened even further. He said, actually, after the engagement party, I wanted to find you, but my brother took you abroad, and I couldn't find you. I've thought a lot about things these past few days. Rupert rambled on. For some reason, it reminded me of the time when we were dating. I still remember when you proposed to me, Rupert. I interrupted his trip down memory lane, furrowing my brows. What exactly are you trying to say now? Are you saying you regret it? Rupert fell silent. I bluntly exposed his feelings, my gaze cold as I stared at him. Back then, you called off the engagement and chose Phoenix. Now you act like this, what do you think of me? And what do you think of Phoenix? Do you think the world revolves around you? People always regret their wrong choices only after they've made them. Back then, Rupert had considered me the wrong choice. Now that he regretted it, he saw Phoenix as the wrong choice. But I was never an option to be fixed there, waiting for Rupert to change his mind. Rupert fell silent. The coldness in my eyes felt like a sharp knife, slowly stripping him of his dignity. Rupert mumbled, his face pale and ugly. 10 minutes hadn't even passed, and I was already standing up. Rupert, I'm Michael's fiancé now. Your apology just adds to my troubles. I don't want Michael to misunderstand. Please, don't come looking for me again. I turned and left. Rupert suddenly called out to stop me. What if I told you all of this was planned by Michael? Ivy, I never thought about calling off the engagement. It was Michael who came to see me the day before we got engaged. I turned around, stunned. Rupert continued, if you don't believe me, you can check the drawer in his study. He's been plotting against you for a long time. He's no good. I returned home, uneasy. There was a pair of shoes by the entrance. It was Michael. He was back. Sure enough, the next moment, I heard his voice at the top of the stairs. Ivy. I looked up and saw Michael's eyes softening as he glanced at me. He slowly walked down the stairs, his fresh yet gentle aura quickly affecting me. You're back? I nodded. Michael asked me what I bought. I was a little out of sorts but still answered his questions. Then take a rest for a while. We'll go out for dinner tonight. Michael said he had to go back to his study to handle some things. I'll go with you. I reached out to grab Michael's arm. He looked at me, surprised. I stammered. I'm not tired. I don't have anything to do. My lie was clumsy, and I was afraid Michael would catch on. After all, I had never been to his study before. But unexpectedly, Michael agreed. Okay. To keep me from getting bored, Michael started a movie for me. In the middle of it, he went out to take a call. During the long few minutes of waiting, I watched Michael talking on the phone through the slightly ajar door. It seemed like this call wasn't going to end soon. So, I shifted my gaze to Michael's desk. If you don't believe me, you can check the drawer in his study. Rupert's voice echoed in my ears. I stood up. It was silence, doubt, and fear. In the end, I reached out and pulled open the drawer. But the drawer was empty, except for a book. Ivy. Michael's voice suddenly sounded. I jumped, and the book in my hand fell, a yellowed, old postcard fluttering out. The man in front of me froze, his expression confused as he saw my actions, his gaze growing darker. What are you looking for? His look made me feel uneasy, but even more, I felt guilty. I couldn't respond. I was doubting my fiancé, wondering if he had bad intentions toward me. He was hiding something from me, something about me. I took a deep breath, thinking of 1,000 excuses and reasons to avoid the situation. But there was a voice in my head telling me I shouldn't back away. So I clenched my fist and looked Michael straight in the eye. I need to ask you something. Michael froze. I met Rupert this morning. He said some things to me. Michael, I want to know, is Rupert calling off the engagement related to you? Maybe he didn't expect me to be so direct. This time, Michael was the one who fell silent. Don't lie to me, or I'll never forgive you. I made a firm statement. Michael lowered his gaze, his glasses and long lashes hiding his thoughts. Finally, I heard Michael's voice. Yes. My heart sank with a heavy thud. The word hit me like a blow to the head. Why? I was a little dazed, instinctively furrowing my brows. Did Michael want to break me and Rupert apart? That's right, the first time I met him, he clearly showed his indifference and dislike for me. In the following meetings, he repeatedly hinted that I should break up with Rupert. In Michael's mind, he probably never wanted me to be with Rupert. Unless Rupert's words that day were true. Michael. I love you. My thoughts were cut off, and the idea that popped into my head wasn't as shocking as Michael's words. I froze, eyes wide. What did you just say? Michael repeated. I've loved you for a long time. I don't want you to marry Rupert. A long time? The first time we met, it was when Rupert brought me home. At that time, everyone assumed I was Rupert's future wife. So, Michael started loving me back then? You're crazy. I was going to be your future sister-in-law. But you never became his fiancée, did you? Michael countered. He raised his eyes to look at me, the light behind his glasses dark and deep. And I could even sense a coldness in his gaze. This was probably the real Michael. I felt a chill. Ivy, actually. Michael stepped closer to me. I took a step back. He noticed my retreat and his expression grew ominous. I'm confused. Michael, I need some time to calm down. I stammered, pulling away from Michael. Michael quickly grabbed my arm. I flinched. How long? Michael asked, his gaze showing a hint of vulnerability. My heart was in turmoil. I don't know. I pulled away, whispering. Michael didn't pressure me. He simply said, okay. After that day, he moved out of the master bedroom and started coming home late, leaving early. It was clear he was giving me a lot of time and space. Our interactions suddenly felt like when we first met. But I was already his fiancée. With the new year approaching, there were more occasions we had to attend together. Some I could avoid, but for the ones I couldn't, I had no choice but to pretend everything was fine with Michael. Others couldn't tell there was tension between Michael and me, except for Rupert. Rupert guessed something was wrong between me and Michael and started being more attentive. Though I was still upset and conflicted with Michael, Rupert's behavior bothered me even more. I refused him bluntly several times. But each time, Rupert found a reason to brush me off. Until one night, after a family dinner, Michael had to leave early. He glanced at me, as if he wanted to ask me something. Before he could say anything, Rupert spoke up. Then I'll take Ivy home. I instinctively looked at Michael. Michael lowered his gaze, lips pressed together, clearly unwilling, but he coldly replied. Whatever. After he said that and was about to leave, I stopped him. No need. I'll go back with Michael. I directly rejected Rupert. Both men froze for a moment. I saw a flash of disappointment in Rupert's eyes. I wasn't interested in exploring it. Michael didn't object to what I said. I got into the car with him. It was very quiet in the car. We sat on opposite sides, the atmosphere awkward. After a while, Michael asked, "Why didn't you let Rupert take you?" "Do you want him to?" I retorted. Michael was speechless, turned his head, and fell silent again. I sighed. "Actually, I need to talk to you." Bang! Before I could finish my sentence, a sudden, powerful force slammed into the car, pushing it backward. As everything went dark, I could only see Michael instinctively shielding me. The icy road was slippery. After the family dinner, Michael and I were in a minor car accident. Rupert arrived at the hospital, rushing to find me. "Ivy, are you all right?" He grabbed my hand, anxious and worried, momentarily forgetting his identity and place. Until I pulled my hand away. "I'm fine. I really was fine. Thanks to the airbags and Michael's protection, I wasn't injured." Michael was affected more than I was. The doctor was checking on him, and he probably wouldn't be out for a while. I thought for a moment, then decided I should clarify things with Rupert. "Rupert, tonight, I was planning to talk to Michael first and then to you." Rupert looked at me, his eyes filled with anticipation and brightness. But with my calm and serious tone, he seemed confused and lost. "What do you want to talk to me about? You must have noticed something's wrong between me and Michael these past few days. Maybe you're right, he has interfered in things between us. But the reason for our broken engagement shouldn't all fall on him." I looked at him quietly, speaking softly. After that, I went to find Phoenix. Rupert's breathing became lighter. One person's one-sided words are always easy to mislead. I needed to search for the truth, so I had to listen to multiple perspectives. After Michael and I got engaged, a conflict quickly arose between Phoenix and Rupert. Rupert gradually came to understand his own feelings, and Phoenix saw through Rupert's true nature. So, not long after Michael and I left the country, they broke up again. Phoenix went back to her hometown. To be honest, it wasn't easy to find her. Without Rupert, she and I had a calm conversation for the first time. Her attitude towards me carried some emotions I couldn't quite explain, and in the end, she simply said, "Sorry." At this point, there was no need to continue the conversation. When I got back, I thought about a lot of things. Regardless of what role Phoenix and Michael played in all this, the root cause really lay in my relationship with Rupert. I actually knew all along that you were paying attention to Phoenix. You liked her updates, you took a midnight flight to celebrate her birthday. The things you did for Phoenix, I know all of them. As I spoke, Rupert's face lost all color. Then why didn't you ever? Rupert stumbled, asking me. But halfway through, he understood. Why had I never said anything, never argued? It was simply because I didn't like him enough. Because I didn't like him, I felt nothing for his actions. What about Michael? Rupert asked, "Do you like Michael now?" He looked at me with hope. I paused for a moment before replying. Actually, when I was sitting here just now, my mind was full of him. The light in Rupert's eyes faded little by little. In the end, Rupert muttered, "I understand now." He left the hospital in a daze. After a long time, I stood up from the bench, and as I turned around, I saw Michael standing behind me. I had no idea how long he had been there, or how much of what I just said he had heard. I forced a calm expression as I walked toward him. "Are you okay?" "What did the doctor say?" Michael didn't answer. He simply grabbed my hand and led me away. Once we were home, he pinned me against the wall without a word. I was surrounded by Michael's intense, heated breath. He tangled with me, kissing me until I couldn't speak clearly. But I still had to say, "Wait, Michael. I need to say something." Michael paused his movements. I bit my lip. "When we were at the hospital, you heard everything, right?" I'm not someone good at expressing emotions. I don't know how to love others, and I don't know how to communicate. The bravest conversation I ever had was probably back in school, when I used to vent my emotions to a random email address, treating it like a trash bin. Because I never received any positive feedback, I sometimes couldn't even tell if my feelings toward others were an emotional transference from my desire for closeness, or real affection. But I know, my feelings for Michael are different from my feelings for Rupert. I don't know if this is love, but I can learn," I whispered, not daring to look into Michael's eyes. Michael, with force, lifted me and sat me on a bar counter, eye level with him. I had no choice but to gaze into his eyes. Michael's voice was serious yet gentle. "You don't need to learn. Just feel, that's enough." The Cold War between Michael and me ended then. He showered me with patience and kindness, almost as though he were teaching me how to love. At times, I couldn't handle it and would ask him, "How do you know how to do all this?" He didn't answer, but instead asked me, "Do you like it?" "I do." "So this is what it feels like to be cared for and cherished." I nodded. It seemed Michael was getting a little bolder. Every time I kissed him, he'd make me keep my eyes open. And he would always ask, "Who am I?" He'd only be satisfied when he heard me say his name. "Michael, did you fall for me at first sight?" I couldn't help but wonder if he was just attracted to my looks. But then again, Michael didn't seem like the shallow type. It wasn't until after we got married that someone in our high school class group suggested a reunion. I logged into a social media account I hadn't used in a while, and the moment I saw my profile picture, I felt an overwhelming sense of familiarity. In Michael's study, there was an old, yellowed postcard tucked inside a book. It had the exact same background as my profile picture. I was surprised and followed the trail. Then I saw the many spam emails I had sent when I was younger. Suddenly, I realized. That email address I'd treated as a trash bin, could it have been Michael's? Extras, Michael's perspective. When I was starting my business in college, I created an email account specifically for sending advertisements. One day, I found a strange personal email in that inbox. It was from a young girl, confessing her feelings. Every 2 or 3 days, she'd write a new email. There wasn't much in each email, just some of the difficulties she was facing. I could tell from her writing that she was still young. I thought it was just typical teenage melodrama and didn't pay much attention to it. I let the emails keep coming. I had no intention of snooping, and even thought that if she didn't get a reply, she'd eventually realize she'd sent her messages to the wrong inbox and stop. But to my surprise, she kept writing for a whole year. Eventually, I realized she hadn't expected a reply at all. She was using that advertisement email as a place to vent her emotions. Time passed, and I got so used to it that I could tell it was her whenever I heard a new email notification. Until one day, I realized I hadn't received a message from her in a while. I wondered if something had happened to her. I opened her last email. She wrote that she had developed depression due to some reasons and had taken a break from school. Unlike before, I could feel her despair even through the screen. At that moment, I felt a wave of anxiety and concern. I went back and read all her previous emails. I realized that her unhappiness had been due to her family's issues. I regretted not noticing it sooner and not responding with more encouragement. I thought, maybe if I had done that, things wouldn't have turned out this way. I decided to write her back and ask how she was doing. I thought for a long time, unsure of how to begin. In the end, I just sent a postcard. It was a photo I had taken during a trip, of the sun shining on a mountain. Because I liked it, I added a quote, "No matter how long the nightmare lasts, the morning sun will always tear it apart." I hoped she would understand what I meant. But unfortunately, like all my countless spam emails, that postcard also vanished into the void without a response. Later, I went to my cousin's parent-teacher conference, and the teacher added me to a group. In the midst of introductions, a particular profile picture caught my eye. "Ivy, this is the parents group, not the student group. Please have your parents join." "Teacher, I can handle my own issues, no need for my parents." I heard a cold, stubborn voice from the corner. It was a face I didn't recognize, aloof yet determined. It suddenly matched the mysterious girl from the emails in my memory. "Rupert, is that girl in your class?" "You mean Ivy?" "Oh, yeah, she's a bit odd, why?" "Oh, nothing, just that her family has some ties with mine." "Ties?" Rupert frowned. "I didn't know about that. It's from the older generation, never mind. Since she's in your class, can you take care of her for me?" Rupert just snorted, not answering right away. I had no choice but to promise him that I would buy him his favorite sports car after he went abroad. "All right, I got it." Tempted by the allure of the sports car, Rupert indeed complied. Ivy had stopped emailing me. As I was about to leave the country, I couldn't know how she was doing, so I had to rely on Rupert. Until Rupert graduated, and I returned to the country. In front of a room full of guests, I saw Rupert walk in holding Ivy's hand. "Ivy, this is my older brother, Michael." The young girl in my memories, who had once been so cold and distant, had grown up. The sorrow and fragility from her confession emails were nowhere to be seen. My heart sank, and a wave of unexplainable anger washed over me. I knew I shouldn't be angry, but when I saw her with Rupert, my heart couldn't help but react, just like when I couldn't resist caring for and reaching out to Ivy back then. Honestly, if Rupert treated Ivy well, I wouldn't mind at all. I'd rather not see them and just ignore it. But then I found out about Rupert's relationship with Phoenix. If a sinful thought surged in my mind. It pushed me to gradually get closer to Ivy. But Rupert is my cousin. I gave him 3 chances. 3 strikes, and if he still chose Phoenix, then he wouldn't deserve Ivy. I found Phoenix and handed her a plane ticket. Why should I listen to you? If you go back to your country, you might still have a chance with Rupert. If you stay here, then after Rupert gets engaged, I will make sure nothing stands in the way of his marriage. Provoked by my words, Phoenix chose to return to her country. But I knew these things couldn't be hidden for long. Soon, Rupert and Ivy would know the truth. Rupert was the first to find me. He confronted me, asking why I was breaking up him and Ivy. "How could you take advantage of the situation? Weren't you the one who took advantage of the situation first?" I countered. Rupert's face paled, as if remembering something. Soon, Ivy found out too. I was anxious and confused, yet when the car crash happened, I instinctively reached out to protect her. "Ivy, when will you realize that I was the first to meet you and fall for you?" The end.